This is the X-Man Tornado version 4, and whilst most people say this cube feels nearly the exact same as the version 3, I completely disagree. So is this cube actually better than the predecessor? Which of the two variants should you buy? And have they finally made this cube more durable? Well, there's 6 things that I really like about the version 4, and 2 things that I do not. But first, let's go back to when I unboxed this product, and to keep this section short, in the box was the cube in a case, a cleaning cloth, a nice bag, a screwdriver, and a blank center cap. Which brings me to the first thing that I really like about this cube, and that is that it has a bunch of small but nice upgrades from the previous version. This includes things like an actual screwdriver rather than the annoying plastic tool, and a blank center cap, which is actually really useful. Moving on now to the first turns on the Flagship model, and I instantly noticed how much more blocky the version 4 is compared to the version 3. And this is one of the 2 things that I do not like about this cube. I mean, considering one of the main reasons everyone loved the Tornado version 3 was the unique and flexible feeling, it confuses me that they made this release more similar to the version 2, which was blocky and generally very bad. However, there is also an upside to this, and that is that it is so much more stable this year, which is something that a lot of people will benefit from. And that is the second thing that I like about this cube. The stability and controllability means that I have noticed a significant reduction in the amount of weird catches that happen because of how much more control I have over each turn now. But moving over to the Pioneer's unboxing, and this is pretty much the exact same until we get to the cube. This time round it has UV coating, which is instantly noticeable and is personally something that I am pretty reliant on when it comes to whether I will use a new cube. Generally for me, frosted plastic takes way too long to break in, and I prefer having the maximum amount of grip straight out of the box, which is why UV coating is so good. But the first turns on this version made me realise that the actual differences between the 2 models is a lot less than people have said. In reality, they both feel very similar to each other, which I guess is to be expected. However, from the reviews I watched, people said that the Flagship was closer to the version 3, whilst the Pioneer was much more different than both of them. But from what I noticed, both of the models are different from the version 3, but they are actually very similar to each other. And this is the second thing that I dislike about this cube, and that is how little of a difference there is between them. For me, it really doesn't emphasize the need to go for the Pioneer version when the turning and feeling is close to being the same on both. So if you are someone who doesn't mind not having UV coating, or generally doesn't like it, then I would seriously suggest considering getting the Flagship rather than spending more on the Pioneer. But if we now take a look under the center cap, we come to the third thing that I like about this cube, which is that they didn't change the tensioning system. Now it might be surprising that I consider this as a positive, however it is all too common in cubing for manufacturers to take something that works just fine and change it for something that is equally as good or even worse, and companies like GAN are especially guilty of this. But on this cube, thankfully X-Man decided to keep the incredible tensioning system, which I am very pleased about. And whilst we're on the topic of adjustments, another thing that I really like about these cubes is that they have moved the magnet adjustment system to the corners, which is just so much easier to make changes. The result of this movement is that you only have to make 8 changes, which is 1 on each corner, rather than the previous 32 changes that you had to make on the version 3. And on top of this, the new screwdriver, which I covered earlier, just makes the whole process a lot easier. But now let's go on to some solves, and this is where I genuinely felt a difference in the durability of these cubes, which I'll get onto in a moment. However, let's take a look at the performance first, starting with the Flagship. Now, like I mentioned, there are 2 parts to the turning of this cube, the stability and the blocky feeling. Whilst I really like the enhanced control I now have, I feel like this comes at a cost considering how many extra lockups I encounter per solve. But if we move past that, the overall feeling is really nice, as it is somewhat soft and noticeably smooth, with a much drier and scratchier style compared to the version 3. And this brings me on to the 5th thing that I really like about this cube, which is just how quiet it is, even straight out of the box. And I would go as far as to say that this could genuinely rival something like the Tengian when it comes to how it sounds. And surprisingly, this is also the case when doing fast, aggressive turns, which is really enjoyable. So here's a quick sound comparison for you to get a closer understanding. And now before we move on, it's important to mention that these cubes were sent to me by speedcubeshop.com, so if you want to get either of these, or maybe even the new GAN 15, which I have been hearing good things about, then go over to their website and use discount code UKCuber for 5% off any orders. It took just a few days for me to receive my order, even though I live all the way in the UK, which just shows how excellent their service is. So I'll leave a link in the description for you to click after finishing this video. And before I talk about the durability, now let's move over to the Pioneer variant. And like I mentioned earlier, the UV coating is something that I really like about this model, but apart from that, it is very similar to the Flagship. The one standout difference is that it has the extra repelling magnets, which helps to ensure that this cube can auto-align, but personally I think this feature is pretty mediocre. In general, I only really notice a difference and an actual magnetic push when the layer is pretty much already aligned. And if you told me this was just because of the core magnets, I would believe it, because I think that the difference that has come from these extra magnets is something that is pretty unnoticeable when it comes to the actual turning, especially when going faster. And that's why I said that you should consider just buying the Flagship version, because there's not enough between them to make it worthwhile. And finally, talking about the durability, when I turn on the newer versions and then go back to the version 3, the plastic this year feels a lot harder, which is something that took me by surprise. It isn't really something that I would have normally noticed, but considering how much of an issue the durability was last time, I think the X-Man have gone above and beyond on the version 4 to ensure that as few people as possible have issues regarding the quality of this product. And that is the sixth and final thing that I really like about the version 4. With that, if you have either of these two versions, then let me know what you think about them in the comments. If not, let me know if you're considering buying them. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.